I accidentally sort of staggered into tech in general, sort of desire to get into leadership or management. I'll be honest, Mark, I didn't even think I had the ability to do that. You know, it was a very male-dominated environment at that time, and I didn't think I'd be considered. I made a move to the US, which you know had been discussed, but wasn't something. I have primary school children, you know, we're building a home in Cheshire. It just wasn't part of our plan, really. And I didn't want to, I would never have gone to a competitor. Like, HP is still very much in my blood. I'm still wear the colours, as you can see. You know, I love that company and I have nothing but huge respect for the team. Leaving HP was the toughest decision, and you know, Meg Whitman called me. It was really hard. You know, she's very persuasive, and it was a very difficult decision. And so there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of suspicion. I don't think it was necessarily aimed at me. It was whoever the new leader was. It was kind of like, oh, here we go again.
Welcome to the Channel Chat podcast. Hello, I'm Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show, and today I have the pleasure of Pip White, which is the MD or UK and Ireland of Google Cloud, in the virtual studio. How are we doing, Pip?
I'm good, Mark. Delighted to be here, albeit I'm in my spare bedroom, so just ignore the backdrop.
Thanks very much for coming on. So, Pip, I want to go straight into it because when I started looking at your background, and I think a lot of the listeners will feel the same, you know, you initially started at HPE in marketing, which is unusual for someone that then ends up in sales and in a GM. So I wanted you to sort of talk us through your 7 promotions, because 7 promotions in 13 years, if I'm right, then to sort of VP of Global Sales. So tell me how you started for marketing, then got to the top of VP of Global Sales.
Yeah. Okay, all right. I'll try and skip through it as quickly as I can, and hopefully it's useful and interesting for your listeners. I accidentally sort of staggered into tech in general. I worked for a small marketing agency local that I actually found in the job centre, and I was very lucky that they agreed to sponsor my degree at night school. So that's kind of how it worked. Did my degree, worked for them, finished my degree, and then went to a bigger agency, marketing agency, who worked in tech. So I was looking after customers like SAP, JD Edwards, and one of my customers joined HP and said, you know, you should come along, but you should work in sales ultimately, because you've got, obviously she thought I had the gift of the gab, maybe. I don't know. And I'll be honest, there was a definite financial motivation there. And so I joined HP, but very honestly asked if I could go on their sales grad program, which, you know, you're talking 2004, I think. So at that time, it was really IBM, Cisco, Dell, HP. You know, those were the big prominent tech players, and those were ones that had really great sales school programs. And so I was very lucky to get the role in HP. They committed that I do the year in marketing, but I could do the sales program kind of in night school, or, you know, outside of the day job, and go into sales. And I did that. I was very lucky to be given that opportunity, and sort of that's how it played out. I can't remember how many promotions you said, 8 in 13 years. It's actually more condensed than that, because I just worked in sales and did various sales roles for my first 7 or 8 years, whilst I was having my having my family and growing my family and having the kids. And I didn't really have any sort of desire to get into leadership or management. I'll be honest, Mark, I didn't even think I had the ability to do that. You know, it was a very male-dominated environment at that time, and I didn't think I'd be considered. But when I came back off my second lot of maternity leave, a very charming chap called Ian Stephen, who unfortunately is not with us anymore, but he was at HP for a long time, and he said to me, you should go into leadership. And I was like, what, me? And he was like, you should really do this. And then all of a sudden I just got thrown into the deep end in a role with like 20 people reporting to me. And this was at the time when Meg Whitman had just joined, so a lot of change at HP. And then I sort of found my calling. I know that's a bit cheesy, sorry for that, but I just absolutely loved it. And then I think that's really where I excelled. Sorry, my notification telling me that I need to talk to you is pinging in the background.
Don't worry.
So yeah, I sort of found my calling, and then the last 6 or 7 years at HP, I just was very lucky to be given more and more opportunities and get lots of promotions. And I don't, obviously there was a lot of hard work that went into that, and it didn't just kind of get delivered to me on a plate. But I was very lucky that HP saw something in me and continued to give me the opportunities to progress.
How do you get noticed in a big corporate like that? Because you mentioned that your man sort of went up to you and said, "Oh yeah, you'd be good for leadership." But were you pushing for leadership? Were you trying to get into leadership? Were you trying to get promoted, or
no.
someone recognised you? Because there's a lot of people out there who will think, I'd love to get promoted into leadership. I think they might not be able to get recognised. So how did you get recognised, and how would you think you can get recognised?
Well, at that time, I'll be honest, I'd come back off maternity leave, and maybe some of your listeners might resonate with, but I had lost all my confidence. I was much more used to Fireman Sam and Peppa Pig than, trying to think about tech and HP. And I definitely wouldn't have put myself out there. I was just very fortunate that Ian helped me and encouraged me and gave me my confidence to sort of go for something. I mean, I still had to go through a process. It wasn't kind of just given to me. So I think a couple of things are, find a sponsor, find someone that believes in you and that obviously is well positioned and that is committed to helping you succeed. I think the other thing I'd say is try and understand your bosses or the business challenges, and then align your work and your focus around that, because that means you're impacting things that really are the priority of the company. So, you can become a very busy fool, I think, in a first line leadership role, which, by the way, is, I think, the toughest leadership role to do. And so I think trying to just be sure about where you prioritize your time to get, noticed and to do good work is something I always try to do. By the way, I didn't succeed all the time, but I did try and work out what my boss's focus areas were, and then at least make sure I was contributing to his or her success. I think another couple of things are just, I am sort of obsessed with continual learning and trying to be a better version of myself as a leader. I write a bit about this on LinkedIn, and I often talk on these things, like today about what it is that's important to me in terms of development. And so I think not thinking you're the finished article and not thinking that, I'm a leader now and I know everything. So I think that's, just continual progression and development and trying to be sort of humble around your own personal journey. And I think sort of connected to that is helping others. We have to continue to pay it forward, if you like. Ian did that for me, and many others on my journey have done that for me. But what am I doing to help others who are trying to sort of progress and become, whatever it is that they're trying to become? So I think those are my top tips, if you like, for trying to make that transition.
Because one of the biggest challenges is making the transition from an individual contributor into management, your first step into management. How did you find that, and what advice would you give to someone trying to get into management as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's super tough, I think. And also in my own story, my own experience, I went from I was working on a big account, global account, and then I went and was managing 20 people, and there was a lot of stress in the HP organization at the time, a lot of changes, and so that was kind of things I'd never dealt with, making people redundant or kind of putting people into new roles, or these were all things I'd never even experienced. So I think the first thing I did was try to find someone who had moved from an individual contributor to a manager, but was maybe 3 or 4 years ahead of me. And, I found that person, and I just used them as a sounding board and someone that I could go to and ask for advice. And I got lots of things wrong, and, didn't show up as the best version of myself, and have, reflected on that a lot in my journey. But I think I think certainly that's one thing that I did that I'm glad that I did. I think the thing that I didn't do well was I assumed when I went into management I should have all the answers, right? They're coming to me now, I should know everything. I need to like be on my A game at all times. And of course now in my like I've got like 15, 20 years leadership experience. I'm like, I don't know anything, you know, and I'm absolutely fine to say that. I'm like, I'm learning, I'm listening, I'm trying to understand. You know, this is a journey we're all going together. But at the time I thought, God, if you admit you don't know something, like it's failure, it's game over, your career's ruined. So I think obviously I'm not condoning sort of standing up and saying I know nothing, but what I am saying is if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know and to go and find out the information, and also to seek other people's kind of contributions and inputs and ideas to kind of get yourself to wherever it is that you're trying to head towards. So you know, just taking you know, not being so hard on yourself and trying to sort of work out that you're learning at the same time that everyone else is, I think is an important mindset to have.
Great. So once you're in that senior leadership role, Pip, you know, you've got to your first manager role, you've been promoted, you've been recognised, you've probably got all the plaudits, you're doing a great job, and then you get to the top of the tree, the last role you're in as VP. You know, what does a VP do day to day? You know, the listeners will want to be interested in that. You know, how stressful is it, and what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, my family think I work in a call center for the last 2 years. But no, in all seriousness, I think a lot of it at this sort of level now is about communication and you know, engaging with people and listening. And being very quick to work out where the problems are, and then also being quick to work out where the priorities are. I think even when you're in a first line role, you can become overwhelmed with the things that you have to get done. And I always think like I remember someone telling me like, what's urgent, what's important, and just trying to work out the difference between those two things. So I think, you know, and then once you've got clarity on those, communicate, you know, I often think I say the same thing over and over again. People must think I'm like, you know, a stuck record, but actually, unless you start hearing what you're saying coming back to you from your team, it's not being heard. It's not being kind of consumed. So I think a lot of it is just around communication and then helping people understand the why, you know, the reasons why those things are happening, changes being made, or decisions, priorities are shifting. And then, of course, there's a lot of communication with partners. You know a lot about that. You know much more than I do. But you know, such an integral part of the tech business, and then also let's not forget our wonderful customers as well. You know,
yeah,
and how we engage with them and how we communicate with them. There's the more kind of mundane part of the job, the back office piece. You know, that you got to keep the engine running. There's a lot of operational focus that at this level you need to have. You know, you need to demonstrate discipline, business control, you know, that everything's kind of running in the way that your company wants it to run. But I think that's like, for me, that's table stakes. That's stuff that as you've risen through the ranks, you've become very, very competent in doing. But the communication, the setting of priorities, you know, looking for the kind of landmines and getting ahead of those, and then spending time with your people and encouraging them, supporting them, helping them develop is really where I think, you know, prioritizing your time is important.
So once you'd risen to the top of HPE, you joined Salesforce. So how did that come about, and how did it feel leaving HPE after such a long time? And also that's so much success there as well.
Yeah. I mean, well, Salesforce approached me, and I must admit, sort of the last 6 to 12 months, I was sort of, you know, I think I don't have an end goal. I don't like, this is the role that I want and this is where I want to get to, because I think that would limit my ability to just be very open to opportunities. But I was also thinking, what is next? You know, what is the next opportunity, and where can I sort of progress from this role that I have? And I couldn't necessarily see that unless I made a move to the US, which you know had been discussed, but wasn't something I have primary school children. We're building a home in Cheshire. It just wasn't part of our plan really, and just not something that we wanted to do as a family. So I was open to the discussion, and I didn't want to. I would never have gone to a competitor. Like, HP is still very much in my blood. I'm still wear the colours, as you can see. I love that company, and I have nothing but huge respect for the team there. So I wanted to try my hand at something very different, and obviously SaaS was not something that I had particularly had much experience in, or cloud, and I wanted to kind of embark on a journey. I'll be honest as well, like when you've been somewhere for so long, you kind of think, can I do this somewhere else? Or is it just because it's HP and everyone knows me and I know HP so well, And I'm sure there's, other people on your channel listening that might be in the same boat. Yeah, so it was a bit of a test for myself. Am I actually okay at this job, right? Or am I going to get found out when I go to go to Salesforce? So top tip: don't fall out with the company you're leaving, just in case it all implodes. But so that was kind of how it happened. Leaving HP was the toughest decision, and Meg Whitman called me. It was really, really hard. She's very persuasive, and it was a very difficult decision, but I also knew that it was the right one for me and the family. And I left with nothing but kind of respect for that team, and I still stay in touch with many people over there. So not easy, but I'm very glad that I did it for myself.
Was one of it, like you mentioned there, was one of it the challenge of actually trying to do it in another company where you weren't proven, you weren't recognized, you could have failed, you could have fallen flat in the face there,
yeah. And I think the thing I underestimated is like the strength of my network in HP. When you start at another company, obviously for me it was Salesforce, could be anywhere. No one knows you. It's table stakes. You've got to start again from scratch. Okay, you're in a fairly senior role, but you still have to like prove your capability, that you can kind of bed into a culture, that you can, do what's being asked of you in the role. And so, that was, I didn't really think about that until about 2 weeks before I started at Salesforce. I was like, oh my God, this is quite scary. So I need to sort of show up and get my A game going on. But yeah, you're right, definitely. It's pretty nerve-wracking.
Now, it was quite a big team you managed, wasn't it? So in that team, you've got every single person that's got multiple things going on in their personal life. They've got different situations, different points of view, different cultures, people like different management styles. How did you go about approaching such a big and diverse team as that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to do is just to get in and get stuck in and listen and observe and learn. And I think, I'm not preaching here. This is just the way that I would do it. I made a very conscious decision that I didn't want to be this sort of leader that came in and made a lot of changes very quickly, because actually I was learning a new business as well. I was learning software and learning SaaS at the same time as learning the culture, and also trying to understand what some of the challenges were. So, I'd say for the first 3 or 4 weeks, I was just listening and learning and observing. At the same time, I was communicating a lot. I didn't necessarily have a lot to say, but I was just, hey, I'm here, I'm listening, I want to come to meetings, I want to support you wherever I can, and we're gonna kind of, this is the plan of what we're gonna do next in terms of like communication. And one of the things I made a really conscious decision on was to be very transparent, because I had observed there was a lot of changes that the team had gone through that were perhaps not communicated as well as they could have been. And so there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of suspicion. I don't think it was necessarily aimed at me. It was whoever the new leader was. It was kind of like, oh, here we go again, type of thing. So I made a decision to like over communicate, be very transparent, be very inclusive in terms of getting people involved in some of the decisions, getting their points of view, trying to bring them along the journey, and then essentially trying to help get them to make those changes with me. Because I think if you can have more of a grassroots kind of following and a grassroots initiatives, then they tend to work better than when it's top down, certainly in my own experience. So But it was a big learning curve because I think, had I moved to a Dell or somewhere, it'd probably been quicker for me to get going. But I was learning the business model, the engagement model with customers, and obviously a very different product set. So, but I loved it because I, like I said at the outset, I love this sort of learning opportunity. So it was a great experience for me. But yeah, not easy. But that was certainly how I tried to go about it.
Was that one of the appeals, that it was so different? Like going from HP to sort of, it could have been such an easy move to say, actually, I'll go to Dell or Lenovo or whoever. And you mentioned you wouldn't have gone to a competitor, but that would have been a natural, easy move. But to go to something so different, was it just that, you mentioned there the challenge and the learning again? You're almost glad for punishment, Pip, really.
I am. I think about that sometimes, actually, because it's not easy, not only joining a very big team that, and let's be kind of really honest, you typically get hired into these big roles because there's problems. You don't tend to join a team that's like, everything's great and everything's fantastic, but if you do, that's brilliant. So there's problems, and you're learning a completely new kind of go to market, customer, product, etc., but all of those things. So, but I personally wanted to get into that space, so I knew that was going to be my own personal learning, and then also like the team and taking them on the journey with me.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is culture. So I think culture, lots of firms get lost around culture. They had Pip, they had sort of beer taps and pool tables and fruit bowls, and they think it's sort of done. What do you believe creates a high performing and happy culture in a company?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you, really. Like the free sweeties and stuff, that's great, isn't it? But I personally think the most important thing for me is, an alignment on the purpose of the company or the business and the values. I think when all's said and done, those things really matter to me. So, what is it? What is my mission? Do I believe in the mission? Am I going to get up every morning and be super motivated to get on with this? And then also, more importantly, am I going to be able to communicate to hundreds of people that this is our mission and get them excited and fired up to do that? And then I'll be honest, like values never really resonated with me until I joined Salesforce, which is such a value orientated organization and something they talk about so much from the very outset. And I didn't really understand what that meant. But then when I joined Salesforce, I saw the value and the power of what that means for employees, for our partners, and then for our customers. And so I think working with a set of people who have a strong set of values that you believe in are really important. I think those are the things that, on top of like nice offices and free snack bars and, but of course, we're in this world now where it's very different. And I think also many employees are being judged by how they've handled the pandemic and then how they're going to handle it going forward. Are you going to make everybody go back to the office? Are you going to embrace a hybrid working environment? Are you going to offer flexibility of home location? I think that's going to be a real talent war going forward, because I think individuals will say, look, I'm going to base my decision on purpose, values, and how you approach hybrid working. And so I think this is a really interesting sort of next phase of work that, we all need to, as leaders, really understand and listen to our employees and then orientate ourselves around, for future success for us all.
No, absolutely. Now, I'm sure you've seen some incredible salespeople in your time. Have you got any sort of traits and characteristics or daily habits that you've seen from the best people? How they do it? What do you think they are?
Yeah, I would say there's a few things. I think maybe there's 4 or 5 things I really see in like high performing salespeople, but anybody really. I think the first thing is like grit and perseverance. It's not easy, this job, and gone are the days of sitting by a fax machine waiting for orders to come in. It's a super competitive market, and you need to have some some ability to be resilient, demonstrate grit and perseverance. I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, high IQ, can you connect with somebody on a screen now, not in a pub, a bar, a restaurant, an office meeting room. What's your IQ? Can you kind of work out when things are not going right for you, or when the customer's not happy, or a partner's disengaging? Do you have the capacity to sort of anticipate the changes that are coming along? I think then empathy. There's some challenging situations that customers are in, particularly through the pandemic. We've seen a lot of businesses in very challenging financial times, and I think showing some empathy and understanding of the business issues is important, and not paying lip service to those necessarily, but really deeply understanding a customer's business and then orientating your proposition, your discussion, your engagement around those challenges really makes a difference to just rocking up and trying to flog some stuff. And then I continue to bang the drum about learning, but I think coachability, is someone, I'm less keen on someone that has a fixed mindset, that they're the finished article in any role, leadership or individual contributor, salesperson. Do they want to continually learn and progress, and do they understand that they've got still things to get better at? So can I coach them? Can they be coached? Rather, not necessarily me coaching, but can they be coached? Are they willing to to kind of learn and improve? And then I think the final one is just sort of situational awareness. Do you understand, it's a bit tied to EQ really, but do you understand what you're operating within? Can you anticipate market change, customer change, competitor change before it happens to you? And then you're sitting there kind of disappointed, devastated because you've lost something, or because it didn't work out for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, great points. Pip, one of the big topics, in fact, huge topics at the moment over the last 18 months, 2 years, has been around diversity. And whilst I'm seeing lots of great initiatives from lots of corporate firms around diversity, still a real struggle of trying to get females, if we talk just gender for a start, I know diversity in general, but let's talk gender for a start. Females into leadership roles like yourself. And you mentioned earlier that, you might not have had the confidence to, when you were returning to work or returning from maternity leave, to come back into a leadership role. And two, females in general coming into our industry, because there's one thing trying to attract them and getting them, but they're not staying either. No. So what's your view on that? And I know it's a big subject, but what's your view on that, and how we could potentially, one, improve the rate of females in the industry, but two, just make it more attractive for females to come in and also get recognised and have the confidence to go for promotions?
Yeah.
Big subject.
Yeah. The big subject. It's a big subject. Yeah. I mean, I think getting people into the industry, that it can start, it's at the bottom and the top. There's very much, two sides to this challenge, if you like. Trying to focus on the STEM curriculum in schools is something that I think the government need to work harder on, and certainly that's not something that I necessarily can influence, but I think there's a lot of great people out there really lobbying hard to try and make that work. I think also thinking about underrepresented areas and individuals, not necessarily requiring a university degree to make a start in your career in STEM. I see some organizations do that, but I also see some organizations pay lip service to that, say they do, but then actually it doesn't materialize. So I think that's, at the starting point, we need to be much more open and accessible for everybody to try to build a career. I really love your question around progression, and there's this kind of topic around disappearing women at the moment in leadership, and you can kind of fill the hopper, if you like, and then as it kind of goes down the hopper, it's smaller and smaller. And I think a lot of organizations pay attention to hiring equally, let's just say gender, because that's the topic we're discussing. We must have a representative slate when we're hiring. We must hire, X percentage of women, That's great. But then you've got to continue to support them all the way through their journey in that company, and retain them and develop them and invest in them. And I think what I see sometimes is organizations doing the beginning bit, you know, they're focusing on the hiring, the acquisition of talent, and then they're just left to their own devices. And inevitably, you know, they don't support flexible working as much as they could, particularly in sales. It's hard, right? Because, you know, do I want a sales rep working, you know, 3 days a week? You know, I would, absolutely. But, you know, others may feel not so comfortable with doing that. I think we have to make that the norm, you know, that it's completely okay to have people working part-time hours or flexible working hours or job share hours, even, you know, however which way we do it. I think there's still not enough of that in the industry. And I think the pandemic has accelerated the gap and widened these challenges, because inevitably, and I'm not saying this is 100%, but the majority of the pressure on the women has been through this pandemic. You know, homeschooling, running the house, making sure there's enough, you know, groceries. You know, who's helping the children, you know, stay on track with their homework. You know, keeping the house running. It's been a really tough time. I'm sure there's been many chaps and guys, by the way, who've been doing that as well. I'm not saying it's all, but there are many studies out there that suggest that the equality gap has opened up significantly as a result of the pandemic, because women have been trying to keep their careers going, but also trying to keep their houses, their families supported. And you know, and I haven't even mentioned any of the, you know, many issues and impacts of the COVID pandemic on personal situations, you know, which is obviously incredibly sad. So I think there's a lot of things that are challenging us. I think, so what can we do about it? Like, initiatives are one thing, but you have to see those through all the way through the organization. I think, yeah, I'm going to say something that's maybe a bit contentious, but political, like the way that you progress in organizations, whether we want to believe it or not, a lot of it is down to your political network, your relationships that you have, your sponsors that you have. And inevitably, when you want to progress further and further, it's very male dominated. You know, I think you mentioned like 16-70% still female. So there's a very big bias to men. And what I see some fantastic male leaders who really believe in the importance of this and what this can do for business. And then I see men that just pay lip service to it. You know, yeah, this is really important. And then they promote 5 middle-aged white guys. And it's like, so I think the onus on some of this is, you know, people in those political roles that have very influential ability to promote and progress a diverse slate. They need to be held accountable. You know, they need to be asked and owned on these programs and initiatives. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to stop this kind of continual cycle. And I think we haven't really seen any change in the last 10 years, which is very sad. So, you know, I think those are some of the things that I always think about when thinking about, you know, how we can help more females into tech, and then how we can support them on their journey to become, you know, whatever it is that they want to become.
Because there's still a big issue in the IT channel around, you know, flexible working, and even though COVID accelerated that, I still hear, I won't name names, but I still hear lots of channel firms all the time that would like to employ females, but don't, because of issues you mentioned, childcare. I've got to pick my kids up at 3:15. I've got to take an hour here, an hour there, and it's almost like, oh, don't really want these problems. It's a sales role. You know what? I can't offer flexibility. How can we educate those sort of companies? Because they're missing out on a talent pool anyway, and you know, great salespeople. But there's a real stigma still, and I see it of, you know, people wanting people be in the office, but still available from 8:30 to 5:30. And if they do want to do the pickup at 3:30, it's almost like completely frowned upon. So how can we sort of educate those companies?
Yeah. It's not easy. I think, you know, I think in some cases you have to just start small. Actually, when I came back off my first maternity leave, I did a 4-day week, and the agreement was like, you can do it, but we don't really want to tell anyone that you're doing it, right? And I was like, okay, that's fine, but that's really what I want to do. But I was an individual contributor, so it was kind of easier. I think we've got to do it, and then we've got to communicate it, and then we've got to lean into the program and help make it work. You know, I often find that men or women that are given these flexible opportunities, they carry more weight of responsibility on their shoulders because they're like, okay, everyone's looking at me now, I need to deliver. And so they end up cramming 5 days of work in a 4-day or 3-day week and delivering and being like super strong performers because they don't want to miss a beat on the opportunity or even give the company any excuse to not continue to support this more flexible working. I mean, I do think it requires a bit of a trailblazer in these companies. Like who's going to step out of the parapet, lift their head above, into the firing line and say, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to support this because this is what I believe in. This is what's right for the industry. And I'm going to prove that we can make it work. You do need a few trailblazers in the industry to help make that happen. And then once that gains some momentum, then, I think that can kind of spread a bit like wildfire.
No, absolutely. Pip, one of the things I wanted to do with this series was help the candidates that are still looking for jobs, whether they're in work or out of work and they've suffered from the pandemic, get back into work into the channel. So I've got a few questions, quick fire questions, Pip, that will hopefully help people that will come for interviews with either yourself or in interviews in general. So when interviewing yourself, how can a candidate really impress Pip White? What has she got to do or he got to do to come and get a job with you?
I would say be authentic. I like people that are real. I think it's very easy to see through when someone's trying to pretend to be something that they're not. So be your authentic self. Tell some great stories. Like, there's all these like standard interview questions which are really boring and dull, aren't they? Right?
They are.
Like, tell me a story about something you're really passionate about. Like, how are you going to fire up a customer and get them excited and take them on a journey, and how are you going to do it in your own, authentic way? I think when people do that, I'm really inspired by that kind of engagement.
Okay. Have you got a favorite interview question yourself you'd like to ask or you've ever been asked?
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I like to ask is to, give me a 5-minute story on something you're passionate about, typically non-work related. So, do you love cycling? Do you support a charity? Are you a secret skydiver? Like, just tell me a story and help me kind of get excited and fired up about it. I might learn something new about skydiving. And secondly, like, I like to understand how they get someone engaged in a topic that probably I don't know much about. So I like to ask that question sometimes because I think that the standard questions can be dull. I think the only other question that I ask sometimes, and it's really fascinating what kind of responses you get, and again, it goes back to this kind of continual learning improvement theme that we've been discussing, is like, what are you doing to work on your own development? What is it right now that you're thinking about that you're top of mind? Now, I've interviewed leaders for roles where they're going to manage 100 people and they don't have an answer to that question. Like, literally, stone face, I don't have an answer. Now, to me, that's a major red flag, because if they're not developing and working on themselves, they obviously think the complete finished article learning and development is not on their agenda, and that becomes a very big problem for the 100 or so people that are going to work for them. So I think that's always a question I like to sort of find out about people. I'm not testing their weaknesses. I'm testing how much do they care about their own personal development.
And like you said earlier, if they're not continually learning, I don't care how long you've been in sales. I don't care how much experience you had. It's such evolving all the time anyway. If we're using sales techniques from 10 years ago, they ain't going to work in 2020. No, for sure. So
you need to be able to work Hangouts or any other Zoom or whatever it is. Yeah,
absolutely. So there is a constant evolvedness of that. On the diversity piece, again, just touching it, have you sort of got any initiatives that you've seen that's worked in hiring for diversity in the processes? Because I hear a lot of people saying we must have a female or an ethnic minority on the panel interview, or we must do other initiatives. Is there anything that's worked for you in the hiring process?
I think making sure that you have a representative panel or group of individuals that are interviewing through the process is important, and then at the same time pushing back when you get given a slate of 5 of the same group. I don't want to sort of alienate the white men out there, because there's they're all brilliant, of course, but you don't necessarily want a slate of 5 white men on your to consider for candidates. And so I think having a very strong relationship with your recruitment partner, be it an external agency or your internal recruitment team, and being very clear and articulate about what you want. I think the other thing is, like, often sales leaders are under enormous pressure to hire quickly and hire the best talent, and inevitably the quicker hiring can be not the diverse or the minority candidate, because those people take longer to convince to make those changes, and they take longer to kind of identify in a pool, smaller pool. So I think giving your recruitment team, your leadership team, confidence that I'm going to wait for the right candidate for the right role, and I'm definitely going to want to have a diverse pool to kind of find the best candidate. And if it's going to take me 6 weeks longer, then I'm okay with that. I'm going to take the pressure myself, or my team are going to take the pressure, because I think this is an important thing to do. And then, making sure that when you've hired all these great people, diverse candidates, males, females, people of different color and backgrounds, then they have a pathway for development going forward. You can't just think, my job is done now. Off we go.
It's just starting, then getting them on the journey is one thing. Yeah. The building is one thing. Get started on the journey is another.
Exactly. And so I've been thinking a lot about inclusivity. How do we include people on this journey? And how do we make sure that when we've hired a diverse team, that we're then including them in all of the aspects of the organization? We don't think our job is done because we've hired them, and it has to be an inclusive strategy as well.
And on that inclusive strategy, how can companies do that? Because again, I'm going to generalize a minute, but I still see a lot of companies, it's very high octane, quite drinking cultures in the city still, which isn't inclusive for everyone. And it can alienate people if they don't want to go out for drinks after work, or they don't want to do everything. And also the other way, when companies want to sort of do, we're going to do team yoga, and maybe some of the guys or other people don't want to do that. So what strategies do you think companies can do to make it more inclusive? Once you've got the diverse workforce, that's great, but how can you make it inclusive that everyone's involved?
Well, I think the first thing I would recommend is the decisions aren't made top down. They're made, in the context of what we're talking about, like trying to build inclusive events or programs, or whatever it is, incentives, engagement strategies. I think this should be a ground up mission. Not that I'm saying that you kind of pass the work on. I want to be very clear about that, because I've also heard that, you're just giving the problem to us. So I think leaders have to be involved, but they have to bring together a team of people who feel passionately about this, to help them, to inform them, to give them feedback, to create a safe environment to say, Pip, that's wrong. If you do that, you're going to alienate X, Y, and Z. That's not a good decision. Right. Okay. Like, great feedback. What else can we get? What else can we get going? What else can we do? So I think leaders who build that kind of team from the grassroots up and be inclusive. I'm not saying you need a team of 100 people, but 5, 6, 10 people. Yeah. Who are feel safe. Feel safe to challenge you respectfully, feel safe to kind of give ideas, and it's an environment where the outcome is that you want to create an inclusive culture for everybody. Then, I've done this in Salesforce, and I've done it in Google, and it's been like, obviously I'm not going to sit here and say it's all wonderful and we're done deal, but certainly I feel the momentum, and I feel the change, and I feel like people know that they can speak up without fear of retribution, retaliation, and can have a voice, and can say no, or can push back, and can try and help me understand, what's important for everybody and how to be inclusive. The days of sort of going out on a drinking all day event and stuff, right? That I think those days need to get going, really, because many people just aren't that way inclined, and also it cuts a big portion of the rest of your organization out. Mums who don't have the time, or pregnant mums that can't do that kind of thing, or people that just males as well, who just don't want to spend their time drinking all day and, in those kind of environments. Some people definitely want to do it. Some people don't. I think we have to be more open-minded as to what works for a broader team.
Yeah, absolutely. When someone comes for an interview with you, what's the biggest turn-off if they come for an interview? What shouldn't they be doing, Pip?
I don't like ego. Like, I'm really not into... I mean, obviously everybody has an ego, right? Everybody wants to be proud of their achievements, but I want that in a kind of humble way, and I want to see that, I'm really proud of what I've done, but I want to do more. I want to learn. I want to succeed. I know I've still got a lot to, to kind of absorb, but if someone's kind of strutting in, peacocking, I always used to call it, you got like a peacock walking in and, look at my feathers and... Yeah, great, but that's not really our sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's really my sort of thing, really. So I think that's the biggest turn off. Yeah.
Okay. What's the funniest thing that's happened to you, either as a candidate or a hiring manager during an interview? Any funny stories, Pip?
I mean, I don't know if I should admit this on your channel, but I did once. I mean, pre-pandemic, I don't know, you may not know this, Mark, but I actually live up in Cheshire. So, the 4:30 alarm bell was a regular friend of mine, or I'm not sure I could actually even do that anymore. But I did once do a whole day in London interviewing people with one brown shoe and one black shoe on. And so I had to make sure that I was sat under a desk with no one could see the fact that I was like completely incompetent at dressing myself.
Oh dear, that's great. What about as a candidate? Have you had any sort of horror stories that you've seen as a candidate? You thought, oh no, you've done.
I did have one. I mean, obviously we're not mentioning names. I actually couldn't remember their name anyway, but did have one man whose but 2 buttons were undone. I think the shirt might have needed to be a bit bigger, and I just couldn't. I was really trying hard not to. I mean, who am I to say and judge anybody? I can't even choose the right pair of shoes.
Yeah, you can't even get up in the morning with the right pair of shoes on, Pip. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
My last question, Pip, for you, and you've been a fabulous guest, but my last question for you, and I think you're a great person to ask it because of all the promotions you've had. If you were going to give your advice to an ambitious person, or even if they're not ambitious, anyone that wants to get up the corporate ladder and get recognised and get promoted to up the organisation like you've done, what advice would you give them? What have they got to do?
I think the biggest... factor that's really helped me is I've worked hard at finding a sponsor that's probably 4 or 5 levels above me, and I've not been afraid to go and ask for them for help, and that's paid me well in all of my roles. I mean, it's a bit daunting, and I think you've got to feel really uncomfortable about the thought of even asking the person the question, and that's the right level. Right. So you'll be amazed at how everybody wants to help people, right? In the most part, like if they don't want to help, that's a red flag in its own right, and that's probably a good qualification criteria to maybe think you've chosen the wrong sponsor and you need to try again. But go and ask someone who makes you feel really nervous and uncomfortable about asking. I want some help, and here are the reasons why, and here's why I really think I can build a great career here, and here's what I'm working on in terms of my own progression, and would you help me, even if just I can get 30 minutes a quarter with you to kind of bounce ideas off you, and I want to get on your radar, and I want your help and support. And I've done that in every role that I've been in, and I've always had people say yes, and that's paid dividend. I've worked really hard at maintaining that relationship. Even when I've left the company, I've always maintained that relationship because it's a small, better than me, it's a small industry. And those people have always helped me, supported me, been someone I can pick the phone up to, and they've encouraged me and also challenged me, very much challenged me at times, but good. That's good for me to feel like I have someone that's not going to pay lip service and say all the things that I want them to say, but also push back and make me question some of the thoughts that I'm having.
Pip, you've been a great guest. Thanks so much for your time.